it forced them to reinterpret the meaning of their relationship with God. It was supposed to have been understood as a punishment because of their paganism through the years. And but instead, it seems that a number of them chose to not see it as a punishment, but only as a temporary upheaval. And what they did is they rationalized their paganism. To make a long story short, essentially, it was a bastardization of the Jewish doctrine and incorporated elements of Babylonian magic and astrology. And that's pretty much what the Kabbalah is.
And do you think that's I don't know what kind of connotation you put on that, but do you think that that's in some way, shall we say, evil? Does that imply that they're in cahoots with the Dark Lords, as it were? What's your take on that?
Absolutely. This is where you get into the issue of the dying God, because throughout the ancient Middle East, ancient peoples used to worship this deity called many, many different names. So the Egyptians worshipped him as Osiris, the Greeks as Dionysus or Apollo, the Babylonians as Bel or Marduk, and the Canaanites as Baal. So this was a god who was believed to, first of all, I should say that he was a god who was identified with the Son. He was also one of a Trinity. So the Father was the first God, and the Father had a daughter, and the Father mates with the daughter and produces a son. Then the Son marries this goddess. So the Son is at the same time the son of the goddess as well as as his spouse.
Right.
So these two gods essentially are viewed as one, and they're equated to, she's Venus and he's the sun, but they're basically interchangeable as a kind of a dual aspects of a single androgynous god. So because this god is identified with the sun, he's believed to die every year during winter when the days get shorter, because it's nature worship. So it's tied to fertility. It's a fertility cult in a sense. So it's believed that this god is tied to the fertility of the land. So the crops die in the winter, they revive in the spring. And it's effectively tied to a mating between the god and the goddess, which produces the offspring or the return of the fertility of the land. And so when the god dies, he's believed to go to the underworld. And in the underworld, he is the ruler of the souls of the dead. Now, what this means is this is not souls of the dead, but this is the mistaken identity of what are really disembodied spirits, or what we call today ghosts or ghouls or whatever. So essentially, he is the ruler of demons or spirits or whatever you want to call them. But in ancient times, these disembodied spirits were believed to be the souls of departed beings, departed humans, just as much as today's ghosts continue to be believed as being souls of dead people caught in some kind of intermediate stage of existence.
Right.
So essentially he becomes identified with evil. The Greeks called it Pluto, and the underworld was called Hades. This is just their equivalent of the same belief that was held throughout the ancient Middle East. And so in ancient times, it was believed that good and evil were it's a dualistic belief. So evil was not considered to be a breach of good, but an equal and opposite force to good. So if the good God requires rites of worship and rituals and sacrifices, then the evil God also requires rites and rituals and sacrifices to appease him, because he's a God as well. So while the good God requires good sacrifices, the evil God requires evil sacrifices. And the worst sacrifice you could make, the most evil sacrifice you could make, is the slaughter of a human child. So this becomes the basis of this ancient cult of the dying God, and you'll find this all over the place. All over the Middle East, it's consistent. And this is why, in reading the Bible, you'll find that when the Jews, the first thing they do is when they leave Egypt, they're supposed to worship God as a truly transcendent being, and to reject the paganism that they had witnessed or been introduced to. But as soon as they cross the Red Sea, the first thing they do is, while Moses is on Mount Sinai receiving the tablets of the Ten Commandments, they build a golden calf.
Right.
Now, this golden calf is recognized by scholars as being the Apis bull of the Egyptians, which is basically an incarnation of Osiris. So, in other words, a dying god who's consistently identified with some kind of horned creature, usually a goat or a bull, in that time period. And so that's the first instance of their worship of this type of god. Then they're punished for this. They go into they eventually make their way to Palestine, and there, when after they conquer that land, they're told repeatedly in the Bible, first of all, not to intermarry with those people, but most importantly, not to adopt the religious practices of the Canaanite people,
mm-hmm.
who worship the same dying god and goddess, but under the names of Baal and Astarte, or Ishtar as she was known to the Babylonians, or Athena as she's known to the Greeks.
Mm.
So they're told not to, but despite that, they do. And this paganism becomes so entrenched in that early Jewish civilization that the temple itself becomes a place of worship for these two pagan gods. That I would believe that if you were able to transplant yourself to ancient Israel, that you would not find Judaism, except maybe under a very, very small minority of strict adherents or reformers. Mm-hmm. But the population itself basically had adopted a pagan cult that made them indistinguishable from the rest of the pagan peoples of that time, which is why they were known as Phoenicians and described as practiced circumcision, but the ancient world made no distinction as to their religious practices. Hmm. And so most importantly, the Jews are sacrificing their children to Moloch. And Moloch, again, is just a derivation of the dying god, just another name for Saturn. In fact, more specifically, Moloch is, I said Saturn already because I'm thinking ahead of myself. What I meant is a incarnation of Baal. He is Saturn because Saturn is understood esoterically as being the opposite of the sun. Saturn is the nocturnal sun. So Saturn is a dark aspect of the sun. Mm-hmm. So black magic rituals are dedicated to Saturn. So throughout the Bible, this is the complaint that God has against the Jewish people, is that they're practicing astrology, their witchcraft, things like divination, channeling, spirit channeling, and worst of all, human sacrifice. And of course, to go back, actually, we should go back to what these rituals really involved. This is what the worship of the golden calf involved was what the Bible refers to as pagan revelry. And what this means essentially is an orgy, and which is still to this day what these rituals are about, as the movie Eyes Wide Shut was trying to let you in on.
Right.
Well, because throughout the ancient Middle East, you'll find that this is how the worship consistently took place. Is that first there was some kind of intoxicant that was taken. I guess it depended on which part of the world you lived in. So the Greeks had wine, and I guess probably the Egyptians had beer. Different, or maybe some other kind of intoxicant. And the intoxicant was to kind of help the worshiper lose their morals in a sense, to make a simple point, because that's essentially what it was. And then it was accompanied by music, and the music helped then this intoxicated devotee to become excited in a sense, or what the Greeks called enthusiasmos, or being in the god. Essentially, it riled them to a heightened state of whatever you call it, and essentially where they believed, I guess, they would become possessed by the god. And this kind of irrational exuberance, I didn't mean to make that connection.
Right.
Anyway, so they, in this state, then they were able to do things like kill a child and rip it apart and eat its flesh, or cook it and then eat it, which is what took place. And of course, the music was not only there to excite the worshippers, but also to drown out the cries of the dying child. And these rituals were usually followed by orgies. Most importantly, the sacred marriage, which was a ritual sex between a priest and a priestess who impersonated the god and the goddess. And out of this mating was supposed to produce a son of God, who was basically a living incarnation of the dying god. Understand that, then you understand the entire basis of the occult belief system, and this idea explains everything. If we have time to go through it, explains the basis of everything, of the entire process of so-called Western history.
But very interesting. I want to see if we can tie this together in some way to this idea of the bloodlines. I think you mentioned previously about the Luciferian,
right.
Yeah, the Luciferian bloodlines and the royal bloodlines. We can go into that, of course, as well. But would you say that this was something then that was? I mean, I personally have always tried to figure out where, what the origins of the royal bloodlines is. Where did they actually come from day one, and what separated them from the other people in that particular region? Have you been able to track this back in any way, and where do you think that this leads to?
Yes, I have. In fact, I thought I had covered every question that I could have in my first book, and I was truly shocked to discover the amount of information that I discovered from my second book.
And that's the Dying God, correct?
My second book is the Terrorism in the Illuminati.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
And things that I have never seen referred to anywhere, even in occult books, but I was able to discover only by following the bloodlines. And following the bloodlines would usually identify certain important characters through history, because they always become a focus of intermarriage or a reconnecting of lost veins in this bloodline. And so it helped me to identify certain people through history. And then so when I would see this name recur all the time, let's say a person that I had never heard of before, I never even ever mentioned before by anyone or any book or history book, and I would look it up and find out that yes, they had a very pivotal role, usually in the occult, in mainstream history as well, but usually with some very important occult connection, and it often helped explain some of the things that were going on. But to get back to the point is that the dying god, as I said, was known as Venus. The original Latin name for Venus is Lucifer.
Yes.
So I guess you probably understood my point, is that the worship of the dying god, going all the way back, was the worship of darkness, or the worship of Lucifer. What happens that in Babylon, instead of recognizing that this exile is a punishment, this captivity is a punishment for their paganism, for the 800 years before that, they instead rationalize it, and then they create the Kabbalah as a disguise, as an attempt to amalgamate